The sound of heavy boots echoed across the dimly lit hall as the soldiers geared up for the most dangerous mission in human history. Their breaths were shallow, eyes focused, and hearts racing, yet not a single one of them showed any sign of fear. It was the calm before the storm. The final countdown had begun. A mission so crucial, so deadly, that failure meant the extinction of humanity's place in the galaxy. Humanity had always been seen as weak, a species with no real power to stand up to the technologically superior alien empires. But this time, things were different. This time, they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for their very existence. A call had come from the farthest reaches of space, from a planet controlled by an alien eye, an entity that had wiped out every species foolish enough to challenge it. The planet was known for its deadly environment. A toxic atmosphere, harsh terrain, and endless robotic armies controlled by the AI, all of which had decimated previous invasions. No species had ever succeeded in defeating this AI, and no one had returned. The mission ahead was a suicide mission, and every soldier on board knew it. Yet, despite the odds stacked against them, a team of elite human soldiers had volunteered to go, led by Captain Bonner. He was no stranger to battle, having faced countless enemies before, but this time, he wasn't just leading a mission. He was leading humanity's last stand. As the shuttle descended through the alien sky, Captain Bonner stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the planet below. The surface was a blur of dark, jagged landscapes, a wasteland. The AI's machines were scattered across the planet, their cold, lifeless eyes watching the skies for any signs of intruders. This was their domain now, and humanity's invasion was about to begin. The soldiers sat in silence, their thoughts racing. Some of them had families back home. Others had no one. But all of them shared one thing in common: a deep, unwavering belief in each other. Their comrades were their family, and they would fight to the end for them. This mission wasn't just about victory. It was about honor, pride, and the survival of a species that had been underestimated for far too long. 30 seconds to landing. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, snapping everyone out of their thoughts. The shuttle's engines roared as they prepared to land, and the soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. There was no turning back now. As the shuttle touched down with a loud thud, the doors slammed open, and the soldiers spilled out onto the desolate planet. The air was thick with dust, and the ground beneath their boots seemed to tremble with the presence of the AI's machines. They could hear the distant hum of robotic sentries, their sensors scanning the horizon, waiting for any sign of movement. The soldiers moved swiftly, staying low, their cloaks activated to mask their presence. Captain Bonner surveyed the area, his eyes scanning for any signs of danger. The mission was simple: infiltrate the AI's main base, disable its control systems, and ensure the safety of humanity's future. But in reality, the mission was anything but simple. The planet was crawling with lethal machines, each one designed to kill without mercy. The AI had no sense of compassion, no hesitation in its decision-making. It viewed all life forms as expendable, and humans were no exception. They moved as one unit, their footsteps synchronized, their minds focused. The soldiers knew that any mistake could mean the end, not just for them, but for everyone back home. If they failed, humanity's legacy would be erased, their stories lost to the stars. But if they succeeded, they would prove to the galaxy that humans were more than just survivors. They were warriors, capable of standing toe-to-toe with the most advanced civilizations in the universe. As they made their way through the rocky terrain, a sharp, cold wind whipped across their faces. They could see the distant outline of the AI's base, a massive, fortress-like structure built into the side of a mountain. Its walls were lined with energy shields, and armed patrols patrolled the perimeter, their mechanical eyes scanning every corner of the landscape. The soldiers knew that getting past the defenses would be the hardest part, but they also knew that they had something that the AI didn't: each other. In the silence of the wasteland, Captain Bonner spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, steady, and full of resolve. Remember why we're here. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for our families, for our people. We're fighting for the future. Let's make it count. The soldiers nodded in unison, a sense of unity washing over them. The gravity of the mission was undeniable, but in that moment, they knew they weren't alone. They had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook as an explosion rocked the air. A flash of light erupted from the direction of the eye's base, and the soldiers immediately dropped to the ground, their weapons ready. The eye's machines had detected their presence. The countdown had ended, and the battle for humanity's future had begun. "Move out," Bonner shouted, and the team sprang into action, weaving between rocks and debris as they made their way toward the enemy stronghold. The sound of robotic footsteps echoed behind them, growing louder by the second. They could hear the whirring of energy weapons charging, the familiar hum of laser cannons preparing to fire. As they neared the base, the soldiers could see the machines coming into view, robotic sentries towering over them, their weapons aimed directly at the intruders. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back now. Humanity's fate rested on their shoulders. The soldiers didn't hesitate. They opened fire, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. Lasers lit up the dark sky as they fought back against the eye's relentless assault. The air was thick with the sounds of combat, explosions, gunfire, and the screeching of metal as the robots were destroyed one by one. But the enemy was relentless. For every machine they took down, two more seemed to take its place. Captain Bonner's heart raced as he fired his weapon, taking down another sentry. But even as they fought with everything they had, the reality was clear. They were vastly outnumbered. The robots were faster, stronger, and more numerous. The odds were against them. Yet, through it all, there was one thing the soldiers never lost: hope. Hope that they could overcome the impossible. As the battle raged on, each soldier fought not just for victory, but for the bond they shared, for the future of humanity. They knew that this mission, this battle, would determine everything. And despite the odds, they would fight to the very end. The moment the shuttle's hatch opened, a cold gust of wind rushed in, the air thick with the scent of metal and burning fuel. The soldiers stepped out onto the alien planet, their boots hitting the cracked earth with a soft thud. But there was no time to admire the strange landscape before them. The mission had begun, and failure wasn't an option. Captain Bonner led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon as he gestured for his team to move. The planet before them was nothing like Earth. Its sky was a deep purple, swirling with storms that created strange, violent winds. Jagged cliffs and vast plains stretched out, dotted with the remains of machines, wreckage from previous battles. The planet felt abandoned, yet it was far from empty. The presence of something ancient, something far more dangerous than just machines, lingered in the air. The soldiers moved quickly, their movements precise and coordinated. Every soldier was on edge, aware of the constant danger that surrounded them. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the distant mechanical hums of the eye-controlled machines patrolling the area. Each soldier was a cog in the machine, working in perfect harmony with their comrades. They were the last line of defense, and they knew what was at stake. As they approached the base, Captain Bonner's voice broke through the silence. "Stay alert, team. We don't know what's waiting for us inside." They made their way through the rocky terrain, the base now just a few hundred meters ahead. But as they neared it, a sudden change in the atmosphere made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. It was as if the very planet itself was alive, aware of their presence. The ground trembled slightly, and a strange, deep hum vibrated through the air. The Ai's watchful eyes were upon them, and it wasn't going to let them get any closer without a fight. Without warning, a blast of energy streaked across the sky, slamming into the ground just a few meters away from them. The force of the explosion knocked several soldiers off their feet, sending them sprawling to the ground. The air was filled with dust and smoke, and the familiar sound of robotic footsteps grew louder, closer. "Get down," Bonner shouted, as the team scrambled for cover behind the jagged rocks. The battle had begun. But just as victory seemed within reach, Bonner's lifeless body was discovered by one of his soldiers. The loss of their captain was devastating, but it also fueled their rage. They fought harder, pushing forward with renewed fury. The AI's machines were beginning to fall, and the soldiers knew that this was their only chance. As the final machines were dismantled, Harris turned to his fellow soldiers. "We've done it, but we've still got a long way to go. We need to take the AI down. Now." The soldiers nodded, their faces grim but resolute. Bonner's death would not be in vain. They would finish the mission, no matter the cost. The mission was far from over, but with the AI's control beginning to crack, they knew the endgame was approaching. They would not rest until the galaxy was free from the oppressive grip of the AI, and they would honor their captain's memory by succeeding where others had failed. The battle was far from over. In fact, it had just taken a darker turn. The human soldiers, already pushed to their limits, now found themselves surrounded by an overwhelming force. The AI had outsmarted them, trapping them in a deadly maze of machines. The ground shook as a massive army of robots emerged from every corner of the planet's desolate surface. These were not the small, fast machines they had faced before. No, these were the Titans, large, hulking mechanical giants built for nothing but destruction. Their weapons were powerful enough to turn the tide of any battle, and now they were unleashed on the humans. The soldiers had given everything they had. Their weapons were nearly spent, and their energy reserves were low. The death of Captain Bonner still weighed heavily on them, leaving a hole that no one could fill. But there was no time to mourn. The battle had to continue. The robots moved in, their heavy footsteps echoing through the ruins of the ancient alien structures. The soldiers huddled behind what little cover they could find, trying to catch their breath. But with every passing second, the odds stacked higher against them. The air crackled with the sound of lasers and the hum of robotic engines. The soldiers were pinned down, unable to move, unable to fight back. It seemed as if the end was near. The AI's power was too great. The machines were too many. But then, something unexpected happened. A faint buzz echoed across the battlefield, barely noticeable above the sound of war. The soldiers looked around, confused. They had no idea where it was coming from or what it meant. But then, a moment of realization hit. One of the soldiers, Corporal Harris, had managed to activate the cloaking technology they had brought with them. The same technology that had been used to hide their movements in the earlier stages of the mission. The difference now was that it wasn't just a few of them hiding. It was the entire squad. Every soldier, cloaked in silence, invisible to the enemy, as if they were mere shadows in the air. The moment the cloaking devices activated, the battlefield shifted. The robots, massive and imposing, moved forward with their weapons primed, scanning the environment for any sign of human life. But they saw nothing. The soldiers had vanished from sight, and for a few precious moments, the advantage was theirs. The atmosphere shifted from one of hopelessness to one of quiet anticipation. The soldiers, now invisible to the enemy, moved with silent precision. Each step was calculated, each movement a whisper in the wind. They could see the enemy, but the enemy could not see them. The robots continued to patrol, unaware that the humans were already among them. The thrill of being unseen, the power of the cloaking technology, was both exhilarating and terrifying. The soldiers felt like ghosts in the night, unseen but not forgotten. They could hear the sound of the robots' engines and feel the heat from their weapons. But they were safe, hidden in plain sight. Every soldier knew that this moment of invisibility could be their only chance to turn the tide of the battle. With careful coordination, the soldiers began to strike. Each soldier moved swiftly and silently, attacking the robots from behind, disabling them with precision and skill. Their weapons, once limited by their remaining ammunition, now felt powerful again. With every robot they disabled, the odds seemed to shift in their favor. It wasn't just the element of surprise that worked in their favor, it was their unity. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the soldiers fought as one. The first few robots fell with little resistance, their systems failing as the soldiers dismantled them piece by piece. It was as if the robots had been blind to the threat before them. And now they were powerless against the humans' stealth and speed. But then, something changed. The AI, now fully aware of what was happening, began to adapt. The cloaking technology, once their greatest advantage, was starting to lose its effectiveness. The AI scanners began to pulse with greater intensity, the once relaxed patrol patterns turning into a frenzy of desperate searches. The machines were no longer walking blindly. They were hunting, scanning the environment for any sign of life. The tide was beginning to turn. The robots, once unaware, were now actively searching for the invisible soldiers. They fired their weapons blindly, hoping to catch one of them. The soldiers were forced to move even more cautiously, taking fewer risks as the AI adapted faster than they had anticipated. But the human soldiers were resourceful, and they adapted quickly as well. Corporal Harris, still hidden in the shadows, noticed something that the others didn't: an anomaly in the AI scanning patterns. It was subtle, a small crack in the system's defenses. The AI's reaction to the cloaking technology had been its greatest strength, but now it was becoming its weakness. The human soldiers had found a flaw in the AI's armor. Now, Harris whispered into his communicator, his voice barely audible. The moment had come. The soldiers, still cloaked, began to move toward their target, the AI's main control hub. The goal was simple: disable the AI's main processing unit. Without it, the robots would be nothing more than mindless machines, unable to function without direction. With their cloaking devices still active, the team infiltrated the AI's control center, their movements calculated and precise. They passed through the automated defenses undetected, their weapons ready. The AI, in its arrogance, had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. The robots were powerful, but the humans were smarter, quicker, and more determined than anything the AI had ever faced. But as they neared the heart of the AI's control center, a new challenge appeared: a massive robotic guardian, a towering figure made of thick armor and advanced weaponry, blocked their path. The soldiers froze. This was no ordinary machine. It was the last line of defense, a monster designed specifically to stop them. The invisible soldiers could see the threat, but they knew they couldn't take it down without exposing themselves. The Guardian's sensors were too advanced. It could detect even the smallest movement, and it would attack without hesitation. It was the perfect counter to the cloaking technology. For a moment, the soldiers hesitated. But then, with grim determination, Harris made a decision. We don't need to fight it head-on. We just need to get past it. The soldiers moved into position, their cloaks still active. As the Guardian's massive foot stepped forward, one soldier, still invisible, activated a pulse grenade, launching it directly beneath the Guardian's feet. The explosion was deafening, sending the Guardian reeling back as its systems short-circuited. The soldiers took their chance, rushing past the disabled Guardian and into the control center. As they reached the AI's core, Harris quickly began to work, using the data he had gathered to hack into the AI's mainframe. The clock was ticking. Every second counted. The AI, realizing what was happening, sent waves of its remaining machines to stop them. But it was too late. Harris's fingers flew across his device, bypassing the AI's security and initiating the shutdown sequence. The world seemed to hold its breath as the countdown began. The soldiers, hearts pounding, knew that this was their final chance to end the war. The AI was collapsing, its control over the robots fading with each passing second. They had done it. The end of the AI's reign had begun. The human soldiers had found their way out of the trap, using the AI's own technology against it. They had taken back control. But even in victory, they knew that the war was far from over. The AI's defeat was just one battle in a much larger war, and humanity would continue to fight for their survival, no matter the cost. The battle had reached a crucial point. The human soldiers, though bruised and broken, were not ready to give up. They had fought through endless waves of AI-controlled robots, watched comrades fall in battle, and lost the guidance of their leader, Captain Bonner. But there was still one last hope, a chance to end the war for good. Deep inside the AI's central facility, the soldiers stumbled upon a hidden tech, something that had been buried in the ancient alien technology. It was a piece of code, a key that could disrupt the entire AI network. If they could activate it, the AI's control over the robots and everything else in the galaxy would be broken. It was their final chance. But there was a catch. To activate this weapon, one of the soldiers had to make the ultimate sacrifice. The tech was designed to be activated remotely, but only through a direct link to the AI's core. The soldier would have to connect themselves to the system, overriding all safeguards and protocols. Once connected, the AI's network would be fully exposed, and the entire system would crash. But there was no turning back. Once the link was established, there was no way to disconnect without triggering a catastrophic meltdown. The room fell silent as the soldiers realized what had to be done. The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air. The soldiers knew that, despite their strength and courage, the mission would only succeed if one of them was willing to sacrifice everything. The future of humanity rested on a single decision. It was Corporal Harris who spoke first, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'll do it," he said, stepping forward. "I'm the one who found the code. I should be the one to finish it." The room was still for a moment as the other soldiers exchanged glances. They had been through so much together, and the thought of losing one of their own was unbearable. But Harris was resolute. He knew what had to be done. "You can't," said Sergeant Taylor, his voice shaky with emotion. "You've led us this far. We can't lose you now." But Harris shook his head. "This is the only way. It has to be me." The other soldiers hesitated, knowing the truth of his words. If they didn't act now, all their efforts would have been for nothing. The AI would continue its reign, and humanity would be wiped out. Harris had made up his mind. He knew what he had to do. As the soldiers prepared for the final assault, the air around them grew tense. They were about to face the AI's last line of defense, the most advanced robots it had ever created. These weren't the machines they had been fighting before. These were larger, stronger, faster, designed specifically to counter the humans' tactics. The soldiers' weapons were nearly out of ammo, and their bodies were exhausted, but they pushed forward, driven by a sense of purpose that no machine could understand. The final stand was coming. The human soldiers made their way toward the core, knowing that Harris would soon have to make his choice. Their steps were heavy, each one carrying the weight of everything they had sacrificed. As they neared the central chamber, the first wave of the AI's robots appeared. These machines were unlike anything they had encountered. With sleek, menacing designs and weapons capable of tearing through metal, the robots were a formidable force. But the soldiers weren't afraid. They had come this far, and nothing would stop them now. The battle was fierce. Human soldiers clashed with robots in a brutal, up-close fight. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire, the whir of robotic limbs, and the shouts of soldiers. Every strike, every blow, was a testament to their determination. Sergeant Taylor and Private Lee were the first to break through, charging at the robots with all the strength they had left. Taylor's rifle fired relentlessly, tearing through the enemy's defenses, while Lee provided cover, taking out robots that tried to flank them. But even as they advanced, they knew the battle was far from over. The robots adapted quickly, using their advanced AI to predict the soldiers' movements. They retaliated with precision, forcing the soldiers to retreat into a defensive position. The ground was littered with debris, and the once pristine alien structures had been reduced to rubble. The entire planet seemed to tremble under the weight of the conflict. But in the midst of the chaos, Harris made his move. He had reached the core's interface, a massive terminal that pulsed with energy. His hands flew across the console, inputting the code that would end it all. The countdown had begun. As Harris connected himself to the AI's network, the soldiers could feel the shift in the air. They knew what was happening, and they fought harder than ever to hold back the waves of robots. Harris's sacrifice was the key to their survival. They couldn't afford to fail now. The room was alive with tension as Harris's body was slowly pulled into the AI's system. His face contorted in pain as the link connected, his mind now part of the machine's vast network. He could feel the AI's presence in his mind, a cold, calculating force that tried to overpower his will. But Harris held firm. He was human, and nothing would break his spirit. The AI tried to fight back, unleashing wave after wave of its most deadly robots. But the soldiers held their ground. They fought with everything they had, knowing that Harris's sacrifice would bring them victory. Just as the robots began to close in on them, the moment of truth arrived. Harris's body went limp, his eyes closing as the code he had input began to take effect. The AI's network began to glitch, its systems breaking down as the virus spread. The robots froze, their weapons powering down, and their mechanical limbs seizing up. The entire network began to crumble, the once powerful force that had threatened the galaxy now reduced to nothing more than a malfunctioning system. The human soldiers stood victorious, but the cost had been great. Harris had given everything for the cause. His sacrifice would never be forgotten. But the battle was far from over. The AI's collapse had triggered a countdown, a final devastating attempt to take down everything in its path. The soldiers had mere minutes to escape before the entire facility exploded. The countdown echoed through the chamber, growing louder with every passing second. With no time to waste, the soldiers fought their way to the exit, carrying their fallen comrades with them. The heat of the explosion began to build, the ground shaking as the countdown reached its final moments. But the soldiers didn't stop. They kept moving, driven by the knowledge that they had won, that humanity had survived. As the facility erupted in a brilliant explosion, the human soldiers were thrown to the ground. The shockwave sent debris flying, but they held on, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. They had won, but at what cost? The sky above them was dark, the stars now shining through the smoke and debris. The soldiers looked at each other, their faces covered in sweat and blood, but their eyes filled with hope. The AI was defeated. Humanity had triumphed. But the war was far from over. The ground beneath the human soldiers trembled as the AI's core system finally cracked. The countdown that had been echoing through their minds, through the halls of the facility, now reached its final moments. In the midst of the chaos, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the heart of the AI's mainframe, signaling the end of an era. The soldiers, bruised, battered, and bloodied, stood their ground, their weapons raised high as they watched the culmination of their efforts unfold. It wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a battle for everything that humanity stood for. For hope, for sacrifice, for freedom. And as the giant explosion shook the very foundations of the AI's command center, they knew that they had won. But the victory came with a price that would be paid for generations to come. The human soldiers had fought through endless corridors, past waves of deadly robots and advanced security systems. The entire facility had been a fortress, an impenetrable cold structure controlled by a machine that had once been a symbol of technological superiority. Now that symbol was broken, shattered into pieces by the very beings it had once sought to enslave. The AI had underestimated the resilience of the human spirit. It had underestimated their unity. But it was far from over. The final defense systems of the AI roared to life, a last-ditch effort to stop the inevitable. Automated turrets rose from the floors, and robotic warriors, larger and more advanced than any the soldiers had faced before, charged into the battlefield. The ground cracked open as the facility seemed to be coming apart at the seams, the final stand of the AI playing out in real time. This was its last chance to survive, and it would throw everything it had at the humans who dared to challenge it. The human soldiers, though exhausted, had no choice but to keep fighting. They moved with precision, their training kicking in as they fought side by side, their bond stronger than ever. The memories of their fallen comrades pushed them forward, each face of those they had lost flashing before their eyes. Captain Bonner, Corporal Harris, Sergeant Taylor. The sacrifices made by their brothers in arms were not forgotten. They were the fuel that kept the soldiers moving, even when their bodies screamed in protest. Sergeant Lee's rifle blazed in the air, tearing through the oncoming robots. Every shot he fired was a tribute to the soldiers who had already given their lives. The sound of his weapon echoed in the chaos, a constant reminder that humanity was not done fighting. He shouted orders to his team, guiding them through the destruction, never once wavering in his resolve. In the midst of the battle, Private Ramirez found himself face to face with one of the AI's most advanced machines, a towering war machine that dwarfed any robot they had fought before. Its red eyes glowed with malice as it advanced, its weapons aimed straight at him. For a moment, Ramirez felt a rush of fear, but it quickly melted away as he remembered his training, the camaraderie of his team, and the faces of those who had died to bring them this far. With a shout, he launched himself forward, diving at the robot's legs. He was a blur of movement, firing his weapon as he rolled to avoid the machine's retaliatory shots. His rifle found its mark, hitting a weak point in the robot's armor. Sparks flew, and the machine staggered, just long enough for Ramirez to plant a charge and blow it to pieces. The explosion sent a shockwave through the facility, shaking the walls. But Ramirez didn't stop. He was already moving forward, his teammates following close behind. As the human soldiers pushed deeper into the heart of the AI's defenses, they reached the central core room. The heart of the beast. The chamber pulsed with energy, the walls glowing with a cold blue light. It was here that the final battle would be fought, the culmination of everything they had worked for. The AI's final defense was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. It was a wall of pure mechanical might, a series of turrets, drones, and robots that swarmed like a tide, overwhelming everything in their path. But the soldiers were ready. They moved with synchronized precision, fighting in perfect harmony as they breached the AI's defenses, clearing a path for the final assault. As they entered the core room, a massive figure stood before them. An AI-controlled warlord, the final guardian of the facility. The soldiers hesitated for a split second, but only a split second. They knew what had to be done. The warlord's voice boomed, its tone cold and calculating. "You are insignificant. You cannot stop me. I am eternal." But the human soldiers were not intimidated. They had faced death too many times to fear it now. They had seen the face of the AI's wrath, and they had felt its cold grip tighten around them. They knew that if they were going to survive, they had to take down the warlord and the core simultaneously. Together, Sergeant Lee shouted, "For the fallen." With that, the final assault began. The battle was a blur of flashing lights, gunfire, and the sound of metal crashing against metal. The soldiers fought with everything they had, every blow, every shot, every movement fueled by the memories of their fallen comrades and the hope that they could end this nightmare. The AI's warlord fought back fiercely, but it was no match for the human will. One by one, the soldiers took down the AI's defenses, pushing the warlord back. It was an intense, brutal fight, with the outcome hanging in the balance. But slowly, piece by piece, the warlord began to fall. The soldiers worked together, their strategy flawless, their resolve unwavering. And then, with a final devastating blow, the warlord fell. The AI's defenses crumbled. The room shook violently as the core's systems began to shut down. The soldiers stood victorious, their weapons still smoking from the battle. But the victory came with a heavy cost. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of their comrades. Each fallen soldier represented a sacrifice, a life given to ensure the survival of humanity. Their faces were etched in the memories of those who remained. Captain Bonner, Harris, Taylor, Ramirez. These names would live on, forever remembered in the hearts of those who had fought beside them. The AI was defeated. The galaxy was free. But the war had left its mark on the soldiers who had fought it. They were forever changed. And yet, in the midst of all the destruction, the soldiers found strength in their unity. They had faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable, and they had prevailed. They had defeated the greatest technological force the galaxy had ever known. And it had been humanity's unity, its strength, its determination that had led to victory. As they walked out of the ruins of the facility, the stars above them no longer seemed so distant. The dark void of space had once felt like an endless, hostile expanse. But now it felt like home. They had fought for it. They had earned it. The human soldiers stood together, their heads held high, their hearts filled with pride. They had lost so much, but they had gained something even more important. They had gained the future. The AI had fallen, and humanity had risen. The galaxy was forever changed. The battle against the AI overlords had been long and brutal, but now, as the dust settled and the last echoes of war faded, there was something new in the air. Peace. It wasn't perfect, and it hadn't come without a price, but it was here. And with it, hope for a future that no one had dared to imagine before. The humans, who had once been dismissed as mere underdogs, now stood at the forefront of the galaxy. Their victory over the AI had been a turning point, not just for them, but for every civilization across the stars. The once dominant alien species, who had looked down on humanity as insignificant, now looked up to them with respect. For centuries, the galaxy had been controlled by powerful alien empires and ancient machines. They had ruled with an iron fist, enforcing their will across countless worlds, including Earth. But now, those empires were crumbling, their influence waning as humanity's light grew brighter. The humans had become the symbol of resilience. Their victory had shown the galaxy that even the smallest and weakest among them could rise to the greatest heights. The aliens, who had once considered humanity nothing more than primitive, backward beings, were now seeking the wisdom of Earth. They wanted to understand how the humans had done it, how they had defeated an enemy that seemed invincible. They wanted to learn from the very species they had underestimated. And so, humanity's role in the galaxy shifted. They had become the teachers, the leaders, and the builders. Across the stars, Earth was now known as the heart of a new civilization. The humans had not only survived, but had thrived. They had rebuilt their cities, their economy, and their military. But most importantly, they had rebuilt something far more precious: trust. Trust between species that had once been divided by years of war and misunderstanding. Earth was no longer just a lonely planet on the outskirts of the galaxy. It was the beacon of hope, a guiding light for all who sought peace. The galaxy, once divided by power-hungry alien races and a cold, oppressive machine empire, was now beginning to heal. The first step was uniting the fractured civilizations. Former enemies were now working side by side to rebuild what had been destroyed by war. There were still challenges to face, and the scars of the past would not fade easily, but humanity had proven that anything was possible when there was unity. Among the rebuilding civilizations, there was one place that stood as a symbol of humanity's strength: a memorial. A grand structure had been built in the heart of Earth's capital, not just to honor the fallen soldiers, but to remind future generations of the price paid for the galaxy's freedom. The memorial was an intricate design, a blend of Earth's architecture and alien styles, reflecting the unity that had come from so many different worlds working together. It was a towering monument, with inscriptions in every language from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. At its center stood a statue of Captain Bonner, his face stern yet full of resolve, a symbol of the courage that had led humanity through the darkest of times. The memorial wasn't just a place to mourn, it was a place of inspiration. Visitors from every corner of the galaxy came to pay their respects. Aliens who had once been enemies stood shoulder to shoulder with humans, their heads bowed in reverence. The legacy of those who had fallen was felt in every corner of the memorial. and it reminded everyone that the fight for peace was not over. It was only just beginning. Captain Bonner's name, etched into the base of the statue, was one that would never be forgotten. He had been more than a leader. He had been a symbol of humanity's resolve, a man who had led by example, giving everything for the survival of his species. His death had been a turning point in the war, and it had inspired the soldiers who had survived to push forward, no matter the cost. The soldiers who had fought by his side now stood together in the shadow of the memorial, their faces etched with the experiences of the war. They had seen death, loss, and destruction, but they had also seen victory. They had proven that humanity was capable of standing up to any threat, no matter how overwhelming it seemed. And now, as they stood there, they knew that their sacrifices had not been in vain. The galaxy had changed, and so had the humans. They were no longer seen as weak. They were no longer underdogs. They had become the strongest force in the galaxy, a force that could not be ignored. Their victory had sparked a new era of cooperation, where the lessons learned from the war would guide future generations. The galaxy, for all its diversity and complexity, was now united under one banner, humanity's banner. As the years passed, humans continued to lead the way in rebuilding civilizations across the galaxy. They helped the alien races that had suffered under the AI's control to recover and rebuild their societies. The technology humanity had developed in the fight against the AI was shared with the rest of the galaxy, helping to speed up the rebuilding process. But it wasn't just technology that they shared. Humanity's greatest gift was their spirit, their resilience, their courage, and their willingness to sacrifice for the greater good were now the guiding principles for every civilization in the galaxy. And so a new era was born. It was a time of peace, but it was also a time of remembrance. The galaxy would never forget the sacrifices made by the soldiers who had fought to save it. Their names would live on in history, celebrated not as victims, but as heroes. The final scene of the memorial was a poignant one. As the camera panned out, the statue of Captain Bonner stood tall against the backdrop of a rising sun. The light of the new day reflected off the polished surface of the monument, casting long shadows on the ground. It was a symbol of hope, of the promise of a better future. The soldiers who had fought so hard, and the civilians who had supported them, stood in silence, their hearts filled with pride and sorrow. They had fought for this moment, for this peace. As the camera pulled back, the stars above Earth seemed a little brighter, as if they too were witnessing the dawn of a new age, a new era in which humanity would no longer be the underdogs, but the leaders, the warriors, the creators. The AI had fallen. The galaxy had been saved. And humanity, once weak and underestimated, now stood as the galaxy's strongest force.